Thank you very much indeed for this opportunity. Thank you to the ATF for inviting me to share some thoughts at this session, and for also all the arrangements that have been put in place to give the presentation virtually. Really sorry that it's not possible for us all to be together and to have those rich discussions that we all aim for. I'm really fascinated and amazed at the resurgence of crop livestock systems work throughout the world, and especially reflected in this particular session. I'm also very encouraged. Let me tell you a little bit about the background that frames that. For almost 30 years, I worked in West Africa in a harsh, dry environment. And of course, it's still like that today. Farming there could have been called intensive because every patch of land was used to grow crops, mostly sorghum, millet, cowpea, groundnut, in the short rainy season. And every bit of those crops was used. The grain for food, eked out over the long dry season, and the leftovers, stems, stalks, and leaves, carefully harvested and stored to feed precious animals when the fields were bare and grazing lands desolate. Animals that in turn provided traction, manure, carefully collected, stored, and put on the fields, and often income to make sure that their new crop seeds or fertilizer could be purchased on time to make the best use of every drop of rain. My focus at that time was on improving livestock feed. I did a lot of work on forage crops, growing different species and accessions, determining their productivity, how well they tolerated the dry season, what their nutritive value was, and so on. The usual stuff, some of it reflected in what we see in today's session. I certainly didn't think about the cereal and legume crops that were actually providing most of the feed. But one day I went to meet a colleague from another institute who was a cowpea breeder. What a confusing conversation that was. We both talked a lot about yield, but it was probably 3/4 of the way through that several hours before we realized that yield for him meant grain and yield for me meant fodder. And that, of course, is what the farmers also saw. They were deliberately growing crops and managing them to produce both grain and fodder. That led to a complete transformation in the way that we worked. Novel collaborations, deeper understanding of these complex mixed crop livestock systems. I'm quite surprised in a sense, I suppose, that these systems are still feeding much of the world. And there seems, as evidenced by today's meeting, to be a resurgence of interest, perhaps a recognition of their potential and value. And many of the approaches being researched are those already underway in lower middle income countries. At the same time, clearly, there needs to be change. Let me frame that with some context. We know that demand for livestock products, regardless of the pandemic, is anticipated to grow. And here you can see in this top slide the anticipated growth comparing 2005 to 2030, right across the world, except for high-income countries, considerable increase in demand. And that's not because people are eating too much. It's because there's going to be more people, they're going to have a little more disposable income, and they're going to want to spend that on nutritious animal source foods. And at the moment, those foods, animal foods and cereal foods, are being produced by small farms, integrated crop livestock farms like we're talking about today. And they're playing important development roles, those small farms as well. But of course, we know at the same time, the livestock sector's getting a bit of a bashing, let's say. Stop eating meat, drinking milk. Let's get rid of the animals because they're messing up the environment. True in some ways, like every sector, we need to do much better. And we find this cacophony of things that the livestock sector in particular needs to do better in, if you like, in order to be more sustainable, in order to contribute to a resilient and sustainable future food system. So I like to put it this way. We need to make sure that the livestock sector, and today's focus, these crop livestock systems, contributes to development, addresses that demand, and mitigates the potential harms. Let's take a look at that in relation to the differing systems that we see at the moment in high-income countries and lower middle-income countries. If we take these key dimensions about production and food and welfare, waste and pollution, and the separation, or I could say integration there, of the crop and livestock enterprises. For high-income countries, excellent production efficiency, lots of food being produced, but not doing so well on some of those other dimensions. For low and middle income countries, really well integrated, as I just described. Waste and pollution, not such an issue because of that integration. But they're not producing enough food, and they're not producing it efficiently, if you like. So on the one hand, in the lower middle income countries, we need to look for transformation without losing the benefits of that integration, transformation towards greater production efficiency, more food. And in the high income countries, on the other hand, we need to look towards integration without losing the benefits of transformation, or perhaps we could say reintegration. Let me take a moment to share with you a few examples from India, the work that ILRI has been doing there, from the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, and from an integrated One CGIAR project that's been happening in Ethiopia. In India, we've looked at meeting the future demand for dairy without increasing emissions or environmental impacts, coping with climate change and climate variability, and starting from today's situation, where there's many small and medium farms using local feed resources, and their main feed is low-quality crop residues. Huge opportunity to produce more and better feed through addressing both feed quality and feed utilization through processing. We found that a small change in the quality of the crop residue has a significant impact on milk production, and that improving the feed quality of the crop residues has a real potential. Why? Because we could show that there were quality variations present, something the crop breeders could go for, that these didn't jeopardize the grain yields. Better quality residue didn't mean less grain. And that there's easy ways to assess that. When you develop Near's equation, for example, you don't have to do a whole load of feeding trials. You can screen all your breeding lines. And through those kinds of interventions, improving the residue quality, as well as some processing interventions as well, you could double milk yield quite easily, and that could have a potential for a significant methane reduction. For the Global Agenda for Sustainable Livestock, two of the technical networks we have, looking on the one hand at silvopastoral systems and how that integration of trees, crops, and animals can really improve the efficiency of production, and another network that looks at how to assess how are we really doing on improving efficiency. I've put the web links here in case people want to have a look at those subsequently. And in Ethiopia, we've had an integrated project going on where we've brought in fodder crops to what was already being developed as soil water conservation structures. And by incorporating the different fodder crops into those systems, it's contributed to reduce soil loss and an increased milk yield of the dairy cows. But we've also discerned a benefit at both plot and household level, as well as landscape level, and been able to start to unpack, if you like, a little bit that balance of crop and livestock production, profits, and environmental management. Complex, but possible to improve. So we're really looking here for the best of both worlds. We need to recognize that change and action are mandatory to address demand, to contribute to development, and to mitigate harms. That in these ubiquitous crop livestock systems, feed is key, both improving feed quality and making the best use of what's available. Huge opportunities to improve nutrient cycling in an integrated circular bioeconomy way. And that means we need to collaborate across multiple science disciplines. I note, for example, those of us in the room today will be mostly livestock scientists. We need to work with the crop scientists, as the example I showed, the soil scientists, economists, anthropologists, etc., so that we can also address context and enabling environment, start to look at those different scales as well. So I think crop livestock systems are essential for future resilient food systems and for nourishing every citizen. We really need to work on and advance them so that those at the moment who don't get enough, particularly livestock products, to consume and who would benefit immensely from that, can actually get access to those produced in a sustainable way. Thank you very much.